Welcome to the Happily Family Conference. We are your hosts. I'm Cecilia Hilkey.
And I'm Jason Hilkey.
And we are delighted today to have Scott Noelle with us. Scott is a coach, mentor, writer, and speaker. His passion is helping people develop their parenting, relationship, and self-empowerment skills so they can raise confident, connected, and creative children. He collaborated with the late Jane Liedloff, author of The Continuum Concept, and currently collaborates with Peter Gray, author of Free to Learn. Scott created the Daily Groove, a free short daily email when he realized that parents need reminders to change their way of thinking about children and parenting. Welcome, Scott. It's great to have you.
Great to have you back, Scott.
Good to be back. Good to be back. I have to correct you, though. It's Jean Liedloff.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, Jean. Yes.
Okay.
And I have so much respect for her work and everything. So I'm glad we got her name pronounced right.
People always got her name wrong, but yeah. But it's kind of funny because, her nickname is Jungle Jean. And she just sort of, the whole Tarzan and Jane thing. So it's kind of fitting.
Nice.
Anyway, she's famous for her stories from the jungle.
Yes. And for like some incredible research looking at indigenous people and tribes and super. That's a whole nother conversation that I do want to delve into at some point. But we had a different plan for today, which was mining your wisdom for some answers to questions that some people have posted inside of Face group that I think a lot of
Facebook group. Yes. The first is a
Facebook group. Yes. That I think a lot of parents struggle with. So
it's like a game show.
Exactly.
This will be like a game show. Yes.
I was thinking we could change my background to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Show where everyone wins.
So not Family Feud.
Not Family Feud. This will be Family Fun.
I'll just keep it boring.
Okay. So the first question is from Samantha.
Samantha writes.
Yes.
Can I read this?
Sure.
So Samantha writes, how do I develop self-motivation, or just how to develop self-motivation and resilience? My eldest, who's 4.5, fears failure and can find it tough to persevere when things get tricky. So how do I develop self-motivation and resilience with my child?
Yeah. And I think of a 4.5-year-old, they might be struggling with learning how to tie their shoes or drawing a picture and it's just not coming out right and be like, ah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be, hold on. I'm going to be kind of a little bit of the annoying guest who doesn't quite answer the questions that are asked. But I think sometimes the answer to the question is sort of a different question. Like, well, why are you asking the question in that particular way? Like, or is there something about
self-motivation
inherent in the question that is sort of reveals the need for a different understanding? And you're exactly right. I would say self-motivation is something you want to explore because it's one of those things that in parenting, we often sort of think about sort of the outcome that we want, and then we forget sort of like what's going on in the interior of the child. So self-motivation is something you really want to explore. What does that mean? And is it possible that we as parents and teachers and adults in general have sort of distorted about that? In particular, I've been thinking a lot about motivation lately because of a sort of an online argument that I got into about using behaviorism techniques, rewards to sort of train children in various ways. And my understanding is that when we talk about self-motivation, we're not necessarily talking about the actual authentic self of the child. We're talking about really wanting the child to be motivated to do our bidding, or something that we think they should do, or a milestone that we think they should reach by a particular time. And so that a better question is to sort of assume that the motivation, that everyone is self-motivated, like unless you're sort of suicidal or dying, or that everyone is motivated to grow, to become empowered, to learn, to discover, to expand. that's why we're curious and playful. That's why we don't, like, if you're just sat in an empty room, you'll look around for something to fiddle with, because you're just motivated to grow or expand or discover things all the time, or to become more of who you are. So, maybe the question is, why is my child's motivation sort of not aligning with mine? Or is there something about that child's growth that I'm not, maybe that if I understood it, it wouldn't bother me that he or she didn't seem to be motivated in a particular way. So maybe if you could go back to the question, was there a specific motivation that we were talking about?
No, there wasn't a specific situation, but I do agree with you that oftentimes when parents are asking about self-motivation, it's because they, want their kid to be self-motivated to like do the things that the parent wants to get done. Like, how can you be more self-motivated to do your homework or to like do the dishes or, take a shower?
And I'm going to presume that your writer has good intentions and isn't just trying to control her child. So she probably wants to, make sure that her child is getting what he needs to grow in a healthy direction. So we'll start with that presumption. And usually what I'll say is to encourage that. I'll give a generic answer because I don't know specifically what motivation we're talking about here, but in general, you can always, if you're looking for it, you can always see evidence of self-motivation toward empowerment in general, toward growing into an empowered, self-sufficient human being. And self-sufficient isn't probably the right word. Competent, social, and appropriately self-reliant human being. And so when you're looking for that evidence, it usually kind of puts you at ease if you can say to yourself, okay, maybe my child isn't doing, reaching for the particular skill that I think they should be reaching for, but I can see that he or she is reaching. And I can sort of trust that he or she has. See, we need the examples. The examples need to have a gender, so I don't have to keep saying he or she. Make one up. Anyway, your child really, as long as your child is reaching, you can relax. That's what I would say. And just trust that they'll find their way to whatever sort of development they need at the right moment when they're ready. So sometimes we have ideas. This is why it's sort of dangerous to read parenting books that sort of talk about milestones, and then you're like, oh my God, and my baby's 9 months and she isn't, she isn't babbling the way they say she's supposed to be babbling, or, and children just, they'll surprise you, the paths that they take to get to competence. They'll continually surprise you. I like to tell the story of my older daughter, who has become a fantastic singer. She has sung professionally, and her mother is also a professional singer, so it's not surprising. But when she was growing up, she could barely sing in tune. And we thought, oh, what's wrong? She should be able to sing in tune by now. But when I looked a little deeper, I thought, well, wait a minute. Is she reaching? And clearly she was singing with such passion and expression. And I'm like, well, who am I to say that everyone should learn to sing in tune before they learn to sing with expression, right? Like, she had her own path. She was going to learn to be an expressive singer first and then fill in the gaps later about singing in tune. That's exactly what she did. It's not how most people learn to sing. Most people just sort of learn how to match pitches first, and then eventually they become expressive singers. So that's just sort of, one example of, and it's why I'm such a proponent of self-directed education, because it's so much more efficient to allow children to to learn and grow in their own natural ways, instead of sort of us predetermining what that path should be. So sorry, I'm getting a little long-winded in that. I'm still.
Oh, it's fine.
I love that response.
Little commercial break, I'm sure.
I love that response because so much of parenting is trusting in kids. And I have to remind myself that on pretty much a daily basis, sometimes a moment by moment basis. So that's a wonderful place to start. And I also wonder if for you, if there's also like a little bit of coaching that could happen for a child who is struggling in the moment to problem solve something and is not quite getting it, that we can kind of come in and start asking questions like, oh, hey, do you want some help? Do you want some ideas? What have you tried before? What have you tried, in a different situation that maybe you could apply to this situation? Do you find that those conversations are useful too?
I think they're useful, and they're also kind of slippery slopes. I mean, it's the same thing in the coaching business, which of course I do. I coach with parents, and it's the same thing whether you're working with adults or children. You have to sort of constantly be on the lookout for, am I projecting my own agenda onto the client or onto the child? And to some extent, that's sort of like what they signed up for. So it's not always inappropriate, but I think it's like the art of coaching, if you want to call it that, which I think is a great way to look at it. Coaching your child is that you always start from the premise that you're helping them become who they want to be, not who you think they should become. And that can be difficult, like as in the story that I told, because you may think that the only way they can become who they want to be is by a particular path. But if you stay sort of open to possibility, then you'll find that sweet spot between offering ideas and imposing them, and it can be tricky.
Yeah.
I think that's
great.
Sorry,
that's key.
Were you going to say something? I don't want to interrupt you.
It's just like I think a lot of times when we offer ideas, we're kind of telegraphing a lack of trust. Like we don't trust that it's going to happen naturally, so we kind of, and in some cases that's just that's the case. It's like, well, if you want this, it's not just going to happen. But often it does just happen, and so then they surprise us.
Yeah.
And I think it's a mind shift for some parents, at least it was for me, very early on, about kids. As a parent, my kids were not a project to build, but were more like a garden to be tended. And if I have that perspective, rather than me needing to give them information and show them how to do stuff and teach them, fill in the blank, rather than letting them, just providing the opportunities and allowing them to grow and fulfill on their own. So it's a small but really significant shift, I think, that is happening with parents now. I think especially in these last few generations.
Right. Often a good way to think about it is just like the way you are with your friends, because we naturally, I think, there's a sort of an unspoken contract that you don't want to really be too influential on your friends. You only want to influence them the way they want to be influenced, right? So if clearly they're seeking encouragement, then you give them encouragement or whatever, but they don't really want you to tell them what they should do unless they're asking for it.
Yeah.
That's good.
And I love that metaphor, because when I'm with my friends, I'm also looking at them as a whole, complete, capable, functional human being. I know that they're going to get through it. Like, it's all going to turn out okay. And I need to have that same image of my children when I'm in conversations with them, looking at them as not like something broken that needs to be fixed, but they're a whole, complete person. Mm-hmm. And I know that my kids are going to get through stuff too. And that, just that mindset changes my conversation with my kids too. So I like that metaphor.
Yeah. And there's a sort of a one size fits all answer to probably every question that will come up today. And that is the power of modeling. And so I think it's much more important that you model self-motivation. I think that was the word she used, was self-motivation. Yeah. As long as you're sort of like, if your kids see that you are motivated, that you're passionate about something or various things, and you follow your passion from your own self-motivation, and like they internalize that, and in a very powerful way, I would say. But that it's ironic, because sometimes it's like you're so motivated to sort of direct your child's path that it's not really self-motivation, and then you're actually modeling the opposite of what they need.
And I'll just build on that. And one of the things she talked about is his fear of failure. And speaking of modeling, I think that's one thing that we as parents, or maybe even as adults, that we avoid often is failure. We try to do everything we can to avoid failure. And it can be, I think, nice modeling for our kids to see us do things and fail at those things, and to have difficulty and to struggle, and to make sometimes that struggle is not apparent to them. And so we may need to make it apparent to them just by letting them know, like, hey, this is what's going on, or having them see it actually happen. So,
yeah. And it doesn't need to be a big thing, but just like, right. Whoops, I turned the wrong way in the car. Okay, I'm going to turn back around. Right. And if we don't talk about that, our kids might even not notice that we're making that U-turn. So that kind of goes along with the modeling.
Yeah. And I think kids are naturally okay with failure. It's like, they don't, I mean, when you have a baby and it takes its first steps and it stumbles, it doesn't like, damn, I'm such a loser, and it's,
I give up, forget it.
They don't do that. They just keep trying. And it's only when we are sort of too attached to their development or their progress that they start to internalize that fear that they're not good enough. But yeah, I think failure, the more we make friends with failure, the better. I'm trying to remember the title of the book that we gave our older daughter for her birthday a few weeks ago, which is by Leslie Odom, who played Aaron Burr in Hamilton on Broadway. Yeah. And he's written about his story of success, his path to success as a Broadway singer. But the word fail, I think it might be fail up or something like that. But it's Leslie Odom. So according to my daughter, it's the book is really good.
Interesting.
Nice. I'll look that up.
Powerful story.
Yeah. Ready for another one?
Yes.
All right. Try to figure out which one do we throw at him now? No. So this was I'll take this one. It's a little bit more in depth.
Okay.
So this is from Amanda, and she says, my husband is a very involved dad, and is definitely the bad cop. He travels a lot for work, and my 3 sons act completely out of control when he's gone. My question is, how do I control them? If I continue to be the good cop, they walk all over me. If I try to be the bad cop, they get upset and don't understand why mommy is being so mean. I find myself yelling and losing it constantly when he's gone, but I'm cool as a cucumber when he's home. How do I find balance and get the boys to behave when he's not around? I chose this one also because I know you do coaching with couples. And so I thought it might be interesting to have something that had to do with, a husband, wife, and the kids involved.
Okay. Well, so yeah, I mean, you're right about this being a deep question, because there's a lot of layers to, what leads to that situation. But let me say just in general that, first of all, just to appreciate Amanda for being, wanting to be more working with children than, I'm assuming the sort of the bad cop role is kind of like more controlling. So I would say that if they're walking all over her, she's probably not quite hitting the mark on being the good cop. Because a good cop isn't someone who just sort of is passive and sort of lets people do whatever. The good cop so the bad cop is sort of the agenda of the bad cop is to be right, and often to do that by making others wrong, So, and I'm not making I don't know Amanda's husband, so I'm not saying that he's a bad cop. That's her term. But what I think of as a bad cop is like the one that takes the suspect manhandles them and calls them derogatory words that I won't say here, and just basically tries to make them suffer, tries to make them small, tries to diminish them. And you see that usually you figure, well, that person is insecure and is trying to prove himself, right? At least on a cop show. So the good cop is the one who sort of has taken her ego. I'm going to say her because she's being the good cop. So the good cop is kind of taking her ego out of the, like, it's not about me being right or wrong. It's not about me being good or bad. It's not even about me at all. It's about this partnership that we have. So a cop who's doing their job is someone who is committed to upholding social order and peace, right? In other words, that making sure that we all get along well enough, we don't hurt each other, that we don't break rules that are designed to keep us safe, and to honor our rights, basically. And that's what a good cop is focused on. And so when somebody is breaking a rule or doing something that's harmful, the good cop isn't going to demean that person in any way. It's not going to spew any sort of anger or shame at that person. It's just a matter of, okay, this is not working here. It's not safe. So I'm going to focus on safety. I'm going to uphold the safety, or it's maybe it's stepping on somebody else's rights. So I'm going to uphold each person's rights in this situation. And so it's a very sort of high moral ground that you're taking. You're not really, it's not about yourself. It's about these social values that you're upholding. And I guess I would say it is, sometimes it's about yourself because you're one of the people in the interaction. So in that sense, you're thinking about, what are my personal values? What are my boundaries? How do I uphold them? And not need to necessarily impose that on my child. Again, it's difficult to come up with examples. Maybe you guys can make up an example, since she just talked about sort of behaving well, and that's like, that could be anything. But it's good to apply it to an example if you can think of one.
Okay.
Bedtime's always a great example, sure. I would say. Like,
the kids aren't going to bed. They're jumping up and down. They're not getting crazy, their pajamas on.
Not brushing their teeth when she says, go brush your teeth and get ready for bed.
Let's do something else. We always use that example.
Oh, okay. Great.
I'll tell you why I dislike that example, because there's so many layers to it.
Sure.
If you're like, maybe they have to get up for school, but they don't necessarily want to go to school. So that's like too complicated.
What about how about just coming to the table for dinner? And it's like dinner's ready and they're, running around and not wanting to wash their hands. And she keeps asking them to come to the table and they aren't doing anything. They aren't cooperating. And she just is feeling just like they're just doing whatever they want to do.
She says that she starts yelling and she loses it when her husband's not around.
Bad cop.
Like she's the bad cop. And I'm reading into it that she doesn't like that.
She wants to be cool as a cucumber, like when he's around.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens if you're trying to be a good cop, but you're just being nice. Then typically you're letting yourself get stepped on. And then eventually you kind of become resentful and it builds up until you flip and become the bad cop. So that's a cycle that you want to get out of. And the way to get out of it is to just be really clear on your boundaries. And then just do your best to uphold them without making anyone right or wrong. So let's just say, with regard to the dinner, see, some of these are also sort of complex situations.
Can't choose something easy. I'm not going to let you off that easy.
Damn.
You asked.
Okay.
You could choose one too.
No. Well, I'll use the dinner example. It just has another dimension to it, which is the dimension of consent. In other words, when people do things together, it's always better and more social if those things are done consensually. And that means that you consent to make dinner for your child and sit down with your child for dinner, but also they consent to participate in that. And and so some families aren't going to say, well, wait a minute, I don't want to give my child a choice about that. People often don't think, well, my child shouldn't have the right to decide when we sit down for dinner. Certainly doesn't have, I wouldn't say your child has a right to decide when everyone has dinner, but if the child wants to not to, sit down on a particular day, I don't think that's such a bad deal. It's more of a reflection on like, well, why doesn't he want to sit down at dinner with us? Like, and then to maybe rethink how you do dinner so that it is something that everyone really voluntarily wants to do. And maybe there's something unpleasant about it that we aren't seeing. So generally, kids want to do the social thing. They want to do the togetherness thing. They want to do the empowering thing. And they feel empowered when they're connected to people that they love. So rather than sort of talking about compliance, I need to get him to sit down for dinner. It's like, well, I need to really create dinners that feel empowering so that he's like really quite willing to stop what he's doing and come and sit down with us, because he knows that dinner's always going to feel good, not just because there's good food, which is a thing, but also just because there's good company and there's good conversation and there's good connection, and all those wonderful, attractive things. And if he's not feeling that, well, we need to maybe go back to the drawing board a little bit about what kind of experience we're co-creating. So in that case, it sort of becomes less about like a rule that needs to be followed and more about just sort of a pattern of interaction that we're co-creating. So that's why it's sort of a complicated example.
Yeah. And all of these examples, I mean, everything gets complicated when we take a really big view of all the different factors in the situation. Why is that child behaving the way that they're behaving? Like what's going on for them in their world? And it's such an important part of parenting. So many times people ask us like, what do I do when? And the answer is always like, well, it depends. Like, what's happening? What's that behavior trying to communicate to us? And how can we be really respectful and responding to it? So,
you guys and I are really, I mean, we have a sort of a premise that we haven't spoken, which is this sort of, these ideas of non-coercion, nonviolence, and consent, so that we don't start from the presumption that many parents do start from, which is that I'm the adult, you're the child, you do what I say. And if you're treating it more like, well, we're not equal in the sense of, we're obviously different, but we are equal in terms of dignity. We're equal in terms of our right to self-determination. And so that when things are working, it's not because we are imposing something on the children, but it's because we've co-created this partnership that works for all of us. And whenever anything isn't working, if you keep going back to that question, like, how do we build a stronger partnership? How do we make it work for both of us? You need to think of your partnership with your kids as a creative process, that it's not like a set of laws and rules that are decided in advance, and then you're just sort of policing, to get those to always be implemented. But rather, it's more like an improvisation, and you're constantly figuring out how to dance through the whole process. And if you do it well, it's not necessarily easy, but it's generally satisfying. And for some people, a lot of people, particularly people who kind of have gotten sort of habituated to doing things by the book or by rules and structures, often they think of themselves as not being particularly creative. And so one of the things that I think is important, if you want to sort of enact more of a partnership paradigm in your family, you kind of need to bring creativity in with that and decide, okay, maybe I didn't think I was a creative person, but I'm just going to discover my creativity as a part of this process.
Yeah.
I like I can relate to that. I don't think I'm a creative person oftentimes in the parenting. That's why I rely on my kids a lot. And even when we were teaching, like I was relying on the kids, we were in a partnership, whether it was teaching or parenting. And I'm looking at them like, what ideas do you guys have? Because I don't have any right now. And as long as they see that I'm in a partnership with them, like I'm trying to figure out something that works for them also, as well as for me, that most of the time they're going to be motivated to do that. And they got great ideas on things that they're motivated to do, and it's a matter of figuring those things out that also work for me. And I think that the key here around partnership that really rings true around what she said, where she asked, how do I control them? That's the question I would pose is, why control them? How about work on with them and work on a partnership instead? It's going to be easier for everyone. Everyone's going to be happier. It may take work, may take creativity, but I would say in the long run, it's going to be easier than trying to control all the time. So I just wanted to sort of pair that to what she had asked. Is there anything you want to add there?
Yeah, well, obviously I agree. And I would say that there's sometimes a subtle difference between control and support. But it's, if you recognize that you have maybe some habits of being controlling and you want to act more like a partner, then you can just sort of practice noticing when you're thinking in terms of controlling their behavior and see if you can shift that toward, how can I support them in some way? How can I just sort of start by recognizing that I have needs, they have needs. And so it's not even that I'm supporting them, it's that I'm supporting the partnership. And so that may involve something similar to control, but it's usually more like, again, like a co-creative process, that's similar to control because you're making something, but it's not imposing necessarily.
And that's good. I like that clarification.
Yeah. And then what would you say for a family like this family who it's clear that they have different, like a different philosophical approach to parenting? Do you have, this is like, I mean, we could talk for hours about this, but.
Like if it's not just that they're sort of unconsciously controlling, but they're actually sort of more aligned with a philosophy that's more authoritarian?
I guess maybe we don't have enough information to know why.
I definitely wouldn't presume that about the Amanda. Because a lot of times people have these patterns that they just inherited from society. But we have a real control-based culture that we live in. It's very hard to create a partnership culture inside that. It kind of makes you weird. You have to be willing to be weird to enact this paradigm when everyone else sort of expects you to be in control. It's definitely not for the faint of heart.
I like that. I like be weird. I think there's take the motto of be the weird parent. It's not all about control.
And I think we talk about that a lot. Like this is parenting differently. And you don't see examples of this often in the grocery store or the park or the library.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to find the examples.
This hasn't been role modeled for us. So it is about being different.
Can we try one more before we wrap up?
Yep.
All right. Oh, what's a good one here? How should we stump him next? Stump Scott Hour.
Sounds so mean.
No.
This is just a partnership. This is a partnership here.
In a playful way.
How about this one? Tanya says, how can I help my little boy, he's 22 months old, to communicate his needs and feelings? He doesn't speak well. And it would be very interesting to know about self-regulation at his age.
Okay, well, that's pretty big. But first of all, I would say that I don't think there's anything wrong with children not being very verbal at 22 months. Both of my kids didn't really talk much until they were close to 2. So, or even 2.5. It's like, in some ways, I'm kind of a proponent of certain milestones being later. Maybe it's partly because what my kids are generally late bloomers. I'm generally a late bloomer. I think a lot of awesome blossoming happens late. So I would just sort of say that a lot of times when something is a quote unquote late bloomer, what really is happening is that there's a lot going on internally that is developing. And then instead of this gradual shift, you're going to see it's sort of a massive change all of a sudden. Like my daughter learned to read when she was 12, or she didn't read fluently until she was 12. And that was because we made a choice that, as homeschooling family, we made a choice that we would trust that she will read when she's ready to read. And it's similar to the story I told earlier about the singing. There's all this development happening internally, and when it's ready, it just pops. And for her, she went from not reading to suddenly reading the Harry Potter books, and so a lot of children will develop that way. And so I wouldn't worry about that. Now I forgot the question. Was
how
it
to help him express
regulation?
How to help him express his feelings and needs, and about self-regulation.
So I think there's some subtext there, like maybe he is expressing feelings and needs, but not in a way that works for her. Unless he's sort of kind of catatonic, but I think most kids are always expressing their feelings and needs. And so part of what we want them to develop is the ability to express them with more nuance and sometimes with a deeper understanding of what's going on in their own psyche, so that they can, not be overwhelmed by it, or that they can communicate with other people more effectively, right? So that we're not just all sort of in these explosive emotional states or chaotic. So it's a way of bringing order to chaos. And I would say, again, trust that there can be sort of a late blooming in that respect, late maybe compared to other kids. A lot of these other kids, they maybe seem to bloom sooner, but in some cases they're just being more heavily controlled, and then they sort of learn to suppress certain things. So I always sort of feel like, again, I'm a family of artists. We're very into creativity. So I kind of feel like a little bit of chaos and explosiveness is good for the life of the artist. But it's for shoot, I forgot her name now. I'm sorry.
I think it was Amanda?
Tanya,
thank you. So Tanya's child, I would kind of think that there's not necessarily anything wrong. But if it's the kind of thing like where there's tantrums, again, modeling is the go-to thing. If you can model self-regulation, emotional self-regulation, and you can sort of, let me say it differently. I think there's that parents create these kind of fields. It's like an invisible field of regulation, of like, if you have stress, if you have stimuli, like, and you're taking that in and sort of regulating it internally, and then emanating this sort of orderly kind of energy, right? Of it's field of emotional regulation, and you can feel it. There's certain people, I think you use the term cool as a cucumber, but there are certain people who you describe that way because it's like this field of coolness, of orderly sort of well-regulated emotional energy. And you want to be close to that person because when you're in their field, when you're close enough to them, it makes you feel secure in that energy. And that's exactly what our kids need. So if some kids are really sensitive and they become dysregulated very readily, And the more you can have a well-regulated emotional energy yourself and continually invite them into that field, the less you have to like deliberately teach them how to regulate. They'll learn how to do it. And there, of course, there are things that you do. You can sort of help them, give them words. Sometimes you can do sort of breathing entrainment is a great thing to do. So if your child is sort of dysregulated and you hold your child and you just sort of start to breathe in a way that sort of invites them to breathe in rhythm with you. And that can sort of be a more deliberate way to extend that field of regulation into their consciousness. So there's things like that you can do, or you can give them words. But I think sometimes we're too quick to try to get them to shift from this emotional chaos into a kind of more intellectual based order. Sometimes you just need to have the feeling and not talk about it. Sometimes if you talk about it too soon, it makes you, it prevents you from the full benefit of going through that emotional process. So I like to assume that if the child is having emotions, they're there for a reason, and we don't want to suppress them, but we do want to help them follow a path that ultimately leads to some kind of inner peace. So not a simple answer, but I think there's again, a lot of reliance on trust and presence, really, that often parents, here I go again. Often parents don't have faith in the power of their presence. And so they feel like they have to do something, but sometimes doing nothing and just being present is so powerful. The child doesn't want you to do anything to them. They just want to know that you're there, and it helps them feel safe while they discover how to regulate what's going on inside them.
Yeah, that's so true and so reassuring. And I'm so glad that you talked about the power of our presence, because I sometimes forget about that. And I don't even think that we talk about that enough in our own work, that sometimes you don't need to say anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it applies to not just a 22-month-old, but to a 22-year-old, and just being present for them, especially I would say in the teen years, being available, but not necessarily fixing, talking,
and doing. It's a lot of work. I'll say personally, like, when I see my kid going through some tough times, and sometimes she doesn't want to talk about it, but just me trusting that she'll come to me when she's ready, or she'll come to somebody else when she's ready.
Right.
Like that.
There are times where you can intuit that they want you to help them in a more concrete way. But they're not able to ask for that help. So I don't think you should only do it when they ask explicitly. You need to sort of trust your intuition on that and kind of err on the side of less intervention in most cases. But there's definitely not one right way. Every child is different and every parent is different.
Yeah, I'm just smiling because I'm just thinking about last night where I made her some dessert, and I was like, hey, let's go sit down at the table and, we can be together. And she's like, oh, I'm not going to talk to you, Mom. I was like, oh, oh yeah. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of had a little agenda there. I'm like, oh, okay, that's all right. You don't have to talk. And then of course, the moment that we sat down, she was like, blah, 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 and all this happened at school and this boy and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, yep. I just need to let go of my agenda.
Right.
Yep.
And it's worth mentioning because we're talking about a teenager here, and for Tanya, we're talking about a nearly 2-year-old, and those are both stages where young people are really trying to figure out who they are and what is my will versus what is my parents' will, and so they will tend to be allergic to any sort of imposition of your will. And often very energetically let you know that.
Yeah. Which, not to get too caught in developmental milestones, but that is exactly, that energetic expression is exactly what they're doing at that toddler stage and at that teen stage. And it is relieving to know, like, okay, that tantrum, that's exactly what he's supposed to be doing or she's supposed to be doing. The teen stuff, it's like, oh yeah, this is, totally normal. So
well, maybe not what I want.
It's sometimes not what I want.
I like the way we've talked about it is, being there with it and still being able to recognize it rather than putting our will on it. Scott, we have a whole list of questions here, and I think we'll probably wrap up here and we'll do a part 2. But is there
we need to do a lightning round next time?
Yeah. I don't think that any of us can do a lightning round. We're all like super deep thinkers here. So,
but as we do wrap up, is there anything you want to say as a final word or an ask for the here for the conference?
Well, of course, I always invite people to subscribe to the Daily Groove, and where I do actually take the time necessary to take these long thoughts or these long conversations and try to distill them down to 1 minute or like 200 words or less. So that's a place where you can get sort of daily tips and ideas about how to shift into more of a partnership style of parenting. That's at dailygroove.com. You can go there and click on subscribe.
And I just want to underscore that's something you do at no charge. So people just can sign up for that email list and get that on a regular basis. It's really valuable and it's generous of what you do.
And I want to say they're awesome.
Yeah.
I love the daily reminders, and I continue to grow and think and reflect by having you in my inbox. So thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. Awesome. That's great. The other thing I want to mention is that my family are going to Europe this summer in August and September. We're going to be in Sweden, Italy, France, Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and the UK. So we're going to be there for 7 weeks. And our goal is to connect with some of the communities of conscious parenting and self-directed education is the other big issue that I'm involved with. So I just wanted to put that out there in case there's anyone who is, wants to connect with me or wants to find out, where we're going to be, and maybe I don't know. We're open to sort of this serendipity of connecting with people when the time is right. So if you go to the dailygroove.com, that's also a place where you can just click on the contact and send me an email if you want to be in that loop.
That'd be exciting. And we do have people here in this conference from all of those locations. And so I would encourage them to reach out to you. That'd be a fun opportunity, meet in person rather than just in this online world. Thank you for taking the time to talk to all of us here at the conference. And thank you for all that you do here in the parenting space and the contribution you are to the world and the world of parenting. We appreciate it. Lots of parents appreciate it. And we look forward to talking to you again here very soon, hopefully.
That sounds great. All right. It's always a pleasure to be with you guys.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Bye-bye.